This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. My new book about addictions, All the Way Home, Building Recovery That Works. So one of these rare occasions, folks, where I felt I had to type out my notes. Usually I just look at the camera, but while the Syrian refugee crisis is overwhelming some countries and some very specific cities in Europe, not only with numbers, but with problems like violence and trash and so on, other places like Canada are finding themselves asking, hey, are we doing enough? Well, there were many reasons that Mr. Harper was not reelected, but certainly near the top of that list might be what some people considered his ungenerous response to this crisis. Who better to ask about this subject than Chris Friesen, the chair of the Canadian Immigrant Settlement Sector Alliance? You've been swamped all day. You're practically on the front page. I think it's page 2. Yeah. Talking about the Prime Minister Designate and saying, look, Mr. Trudeau, 25,000 refugees is nice. Don't tell us by Christmas, we can't handle it.
Right, yeah, essentially that's what we're saying. That we applaud Prime Minister Designate Trudeau's commitment to bring in 25,000 Syrian government-assisted refugees, but over 8 weeks makes it extremely difficult for all concerned.
Because it's not just, and Chris, I want you to spell this out for people, it's not just an issue of finding a bed and a toilet. That we start with something like that, but also
trauma counseling, adult ESL classes, primary health care, protocols and screening, it goes on and on and on, right? You bring in 25,000, you're looking at, 30 to 40% are children and youth. Several thousand going into the school system. I mean, it requires a multi-pronged approach in responding to it.
People are not arriving like vacationers in Maui.
No.
They're coming from war-torn countries. There's been mortar shells. There have been killings. There's just chaos and insanity.
Absolutely, and from reports that we're receiving, both from our European NGO colleagues, the UNHCR, and institutions like Harvard, 2/3 of Syrians have mental health issues. 2/3, okay?
And so that doesn't even count the leaders.
And that doesn't count the leaders, exactly.
We're stark raving crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So we're looking at chronic depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, survivors of torture. So we need to do more, but we need to have the resources and the systems and the supports in place to be able to properly support this population.
Okay, so in the second half of this program, we will look at the building you folks are planning to put up and look at the kinds of services that your agency so beautifully provides. But let's see if we can grapple with the truths and the myths of what is happening in Europe right now. Because we have hundreds of thousands of immigrants landing in Italian islands and landing and crossing borders. We have a couple of photos that show only men. We've got all these healthy or allegedly healthy young men loaded with testosterone, with no purpose, no sense of purpose. They're not highly employed, and they're countryless, and they're causing huge problems to themselves, to their own people, to people in immigrant camps, and to their host countries.
And the issue, of course, is we have to look back at what's a refugee? I mean, these folks
Yes.
didn't choose to, buy a ticket and leave everything behind.
Exactly.
They chose for fear of persecution,
Yes.
arbitrary arrest, detention, human rights abuses.
And for many of them, they somehow, by hook or by crook, had to raise $1,000 to get in the most dangerous little dirigible of some kind,
Right.
and try and cross the Mediterranean.
With their children, with their wives,
Yes.
with their with their parents or
Yes.
grandparents.
Yeah.
So, you'd have to be desperate in order to do that. And these folks are absolutely desperate. Refugees are the one population, and particularly government-assisted refugees, are the one population that the government of Canada actually welcomes to this country. Immigrants choose to come to this country. They apply, they pay their processing fees, and they make the application to come to this country. But for government-assisted refugees, they had no choice.
Right.
They had to flee, leave everything behind, and there's a few lucky few that will actually find their way to this country.
You must have some people, Chris Friesen, who are terrified that some of the horrors that have now befallen cities like Paris and entire communities in Germany might happen here. We read these stories of, a 75-year-old woman has to give up her apartment of the last 23 years to make room for refugees.
Right.
There are rapes in the camps. There are rapes on the street. People in Paris have entire neighborhoods that have been given up to a kind of Islamic terrorism, to young men roaming the streets who will attack anybody. They'll rape the women, beat up the men.
Well, let's put it into perspective.
Please.
1987, the Prime Minister at the time, Brian Mulroney, recalled Parliament in the summer recess, okay? And he recalled Parliament because there was 155 Sri Lankans that showed up on boat on Eastern Canada.
Yes.
So let's put it into perspective, right? We're dealing with a global crisis approaching 60 million.
Yes.
60 million refugees and internally displaced, okay? The UN is projecting in 2016 1.15 million resettlement spaces needed, okay? Currently, Canada accepts between 5,800 and 6,500 government-assisted refugees.
Yes.
So within a global context, we can do more.
Plus others who aren't government assisted.
Plus others that are not, like privately sponsored.
So our average, Chris, if I read these notes correctly,
Yeah.
our average is about 25,000 a year across the nation.
Exactly. And then we look at it from a historical context, for example, 1980. 1980, 28% of our immigration to this country was consisted of refugees.
Yes.
Last year, it was 9%. 1980, there were over 19,200 government-assisted refugees and upwards of 30,000 Southeast Asian refugees sponsored by faith communities and citizens across the country.
We have such an interesting mix of history on this subject, don't we? Because we have the Komagata Maru boat, we have the boat carrying Jews from the Second World War that turned back.
Exactly.
We have the Vietnamese boat people, which was a huge issue in Vancouver in the 70s.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yep.
And so, we have to put this within historical context. The other piece too, yes, there's tension, understandably, there's tension in Europe and the Middle East. I mean, look at Lebanon. Lebanon's population grew by, over 30% because of Syrian refugees.
Yes.
Can you imagine in Canada, if our population ballooned by 30% and they were all, refugees, it would be phenomenal.
There is one fact that keeps looming. It has, in a way, little to do with us, and there's nothing we can do about it. But people do mention this, and I think it is worth mentioning, that in the midst of this crisis, so many of the countries surrounding Syria and the Sudan and so on have taken nobody.
Yeah.
And they are, many of those countries
Arab
are
countries.
very oil rich.
Absolutely.
And one of those countries has a tent city of 100,000 tents with air conditioning and bathrooms, which is set up for religious purposes and could hold people
Yeah.
but they do not.
Right. And, you know, I don't have any answers or insights into
Well, there is
that.
no answer, is there?
Right?
Yeah.
It's just a matter of fact.
Yes.
I think, but to go back to what you were saying about some of the stress and tension that's emerging in Europe, one of the things, and we don't have it completely right in this country, but we have strong lessons and experience in working with refugees for decades
For
now,
sure, yeah.
and a mixed history and a response to that population. But in the late 70s, you know, we were one of the first countries that introduced an immigrant integration policy framework, where at that time, funds, federal government funds were invested into language classes, into host programs, creating settlement mentors, volunteer mentors to help newcomer families. We've been building welcoming communities as part of nation building since the late 70s. This is not happening overnight.
And isn't it true, Chris, that also very specific groups of people, ethnic groups, religious groups, without any particular input from governments, on their own, historically in Canada, have gone out of their way to help new immigrants?
Absolutely, and look at the Syrian crisis now.
Yes.
I learned yesterday on a national conference call with immigration officials that over 200 applications are coming in every week to sponsor Syrian refugees from Canadians, faith communities, all faith communities.
You're saying those are Canadians saying, we will.
Yes.
Our doors are open.
Our doors are open. We'll put the money up front and we'll open our homes to assist Syrian refugees. And that's coming from all faith communities.
Yeah.
Hindus,
Yeah.
Muslims, Jews, Christians, and atheists.
So I think about Success, which originally was a Chinese organization, now has expanded to include many different kinds of people. I know the East Indian communities have done a lot to welcome. My folks came from Russia at the turn of the previous century.
Yes.
We're talking a century and a half ago.
Well, same with mine.
And I know that growing up in Winnipeg, that there were Jewish organizations that were helpful to them. So this has been a part of the Canadian fabric.
This is absolutely part of the Canadian fabric, and these organizations such as ours that are found across the country have been doing this work for 40, 50, 60 years. So you look at the collective experience of the NGO community, the non-governmental organization community, as well as faith communities, and welcoming and helping to integrate both refugees and immigrants. It's phenomenal.
Well, we're going to take a little breather. When we come back, let's look at your plans. I know you've got a new building coming up, and let's look at the nuts and bolts of what has to be done to help someone settle in a way that works for them and works for the existing community.
Sounds good.
Fair enough. Okay. Our guest is Chris Friesen from the Canadian Immigrant Settlement Sector Alliance. Quick breather, your chance to say hello on davidberner.com, and also an opportunity for those lovely folks who support us here on Shaw Community Television Cable 4 to say hello. Back in just a moment. How long have you been doing this? This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. My new book about addictions, All the Way Home, Building Recovery That Works. Chris Friesen is probably doing more than any other single person in this community to help do something positive about the Syrian refugee crisis. We say Syrian, but it's people from a lot of different places. Chris, I had no idea you'd been at this for so long. You look like a young man. So you've really been doing this kind of work for almost 30 years.
Yeah, yeah. It
That's
started back in the mid 80s,
mind-boggling,
you know, and also a stunt in East Africa and mostly here in Canada
Well,
now.
bless you. That's fantastic. Okay, let's take a quick look at the artist's rendering of this building you're planning on building. And where will it sit, this new building, and what will it do?
It's not planning on building. It's actually under construction as we speak at 2610 Victoria Drive on Victoria and 10th.
Yes.
And it's the first facility of its kind in the world. It does not exist.
Because it's purpose-built.
It's social purpose built, and it brings together a number of services and programs under one roof.
Like
130 beds, transitional housing, daycare, adult ESL classrooms, primary health care clinic, trauma treatment center, a food bank.
Wow.
6 other organizations moving in, Van City Credit Union, banking kiosks.
Gardening, law clinics.
Law clinics, employment resource centers.
So right away I hear the more mean-spirited among us fetching, who's paying for this?
Well, mostly we are as a society, you know, as an NGO, but the City of Vancouver has been an outstanding partner, $4.4 million, including a 60-year land lease. Van City Credit Union, $1 million capital contribution.
The land lease is a freebie or low?
$10.
That
Can't
much.
beat it.
That much. I'm calling Raymond Louis, asking him to bring it down to a buck and a quarter. Okay.
So, and private foundations, some contributions from the provincial federal government. We'll have a takeout mortgage at the end of it as well, but we're still actively raising funds to it.
So a guy and his wife and his mother and his 4-year-old arrive.
So what happens?
Take me through the process.
Sure. They land at the airport, they clear customs, they get in a taxi, and as of next May, when our facility is completed...
Before, forgive me for interrupting. Before they get in that taxi, are all of these people documented well?
Yes, they are. So what happens, they land in this country as permanent residents. They've gone through a background security clearance. They've had a comprehensive medical examination. They've had some pre-departure orientation, and through the auspices of the International Organization for Migration, they're put on a plane.
So one of the concepts that many of us have to embrace is that just because this guy's name is Akbar doesn't mean he's a terrorist.
Right.
His name is Akbar. That's his name.
Exactly.
Okay.
And there's a thorough, and has been in place now for decades, security background checks, medical examination. So all of the screening is done with Canadian recognized physicians and security experts. And they hop on a plane. Most cases, it's their first time on a plane. They, on a plane for 17 hours, and they land, with everything they own that they're carrying, essentially, usually an IOM bag, plastic bag. And they are landed at the airport. They clear customs and then placed in a taxi. And from there, they'll come to this place.
Yes. What's it called, by the way?
It's going to be called the ISS of BC Welcome Center.
Okay, the Welcome Center.
And once they arrive there, then they'll be met by staff in their first language. They'll be shown to one of our residential units. They'll spend upwards of 2 weeks with us, a medical team, a resettlement team, a trauma team will all be working with the family and individuals to ensure that they have the best possible start in this country. Van City employees will come and help them open bank accounts and give them their first ATM, debit cards.
What are they doing for money? Are they bringing money? Some will.
Very little, very little. Most will not. And government-assisted refugees are provided with 12 months of income support. It's called resettlement assistance. It mirrors provincial welfare rates, so it's not a lot of money.
It's not a fortune.
It's not a fortune. And so they'll spend a couple of weeks staying with us, getting a number of services and applying for their social insurance numbers and care cards and so forth, and then we'll help them find permanent rental accommodation throughout Metro Vancouver. 30% end up in Surrey, followed by Burnaby, West.
But even that, Chris, is not easy. I mean, any Jack and Jill looking for rental accommodation, that's not easy.
No, and we have full-time staff and a number of volunteers helping just to look for affordable.
So let's talk about knocking on doors. I mean,
Yeah.
your staff must be doing some pioneering, because you knock on a door with a for rent sign. Some people are going to say, who? You're going to say
Yeah.
refugees from the Sudan or
Yeah.
something. They'll freak out.
Yeah, they occasionally do, but then you're in the midst of a crisis, and everybody wants to be involved in the Syrian refugee movement. So it makes your life, easy. So we go with the ebbs and flows of public opinion and political will in working with this population. We know, because we have experience, our organization was actually created in this province as the first immigrant and refugee serving agency as a direct result of an intervention by Prime Minister Trudeau and Harold Winch, a Vancouver East Member of Parliament.
Yeah.
We were the first on the planes at the airport welcoming the Ismaili, 1,400 Ismaili refugees in the fall of 1972. And we know how well that community has done. And this plays out over and over again.
And do you have organizations like Mosaic and Success involved with you in some way?
Later on, in the initial stage, we're the main contracted agency by the federal government.
Okay.
But once they are in their permanent rental accommodation, be it Surrey or Coquitlam, then other organization, partner agencies, health authorities, school boards, etc., all come in to play their part.
So the Welcoming Center, which is going to be at 10th and Victoria, is a kind of decompression chamber.
Yeah, that was one way to describe it, or a regional service hub.
Okay, here we are. We can just
You're safe.
Be safe. Put the toothbrush up on the counter.
Yeah.
Put our feet up for a second and catch our breath. And look around and, okay, what is my new life going to be?
Yes. Because up to there have been so anxiety and stress. I mean, the fear of having to leave your country and then stuck in a refugee camp for in some cases decades, right? Because we're dealing with protracted refugee situations now, and then all of a sudden you win the lottery and you get on a plane.
Here's a strange question: is it easier, more difficult? Is it just a different kettle of fish? Rural versus urban?
It really depends on the individual. In coming to Metro Vancouver, of course, though, it really depends. Those coming from urban centers abroad and who are perhaps more educated have higher expectations. And it can be a more difficult settlement process.
But I can see one of the reactions of homebred Canadians, whoever they may be, saying, well, look, there's no room in this town. So Vancouver has low occupancy rate, highest occupancy rate. You can't find a place to park your car, let alone live.
Right.
So why don't we ask people to go into the boonies? Why don't they go up to Vanderhoof or something?
Right. The challenge, though, is that in those smaller communities outside of BC,
we don't have the resources.
We don't have the resources, the infrastructure,
you don't have
the interpreters.
You don't have the gym, the swimming pool.
Well, it's not even that. It's the primary health care, first language, trained interpreters, trauma treatment programs, adult ESL classes. Those are all necessary pieces of the settlement process.
Yeah.
So it's complex, but you know what? We've been doing it quite well. And sure, there's ebbs and flows and speed bumps along the way, but these refugees make a tremendous contribution to this country and will continue to.
And what about the specifics of the Prime Minister Designate, making this somewhat irrational, heady election promise that we'll get all this done by the end of this year?
Right.
By the end of this year, just talk to the retailers. It's upon us. They're already selling Christmas toys, right?
Yes.
Okay. So how are you able to get him to calm down a bit?
Well, no, it's not about calming down, because we all agree on the number, the response, the need is great.
But it's a timeline.
That's and what we've suggested to Prime Minister Designate Trudeau is let's go back to what the UN requested. UN High Commissioner Antonio Guterres in February 2014 requested 100,000 resettlement spaces from countries around the world. That request was for an over 2-year period, 2015 and 2016. So what we're saying to the up-and-coming new government, 25,000 is amazing. That's 25% of what the UN requested.
For the world.
For the world, but let's do it as the UN had planned it over the 2-year period ending the end of 2016. and that works best for those on the ground, and will provide better settlement outcomes.
Now, Chris, given that you've been doing this a long time, we just have a couple of minutes left
Yeah.
in this conversation. How are you feeling? Are you feeling swamped? Are you feeling excited? Are you feeling geared for the challenge?
Absolutely. You know, we're feeling optimistic, hopeful, and feel that this new government is going in the right direction, given the absolute needs that the global refugee crisis has.
I think one of the problems can be laid at the feet of the business that I'm occasionally in, the media. So much of these stories, the reports, are dire and negative and a little frightening.
Yeah.
I'm going to really be excited and interesting to hear from you a year from now.
Yeah.
With some great stories,
Absolutely.
some great success stories
Yeah.
about the generosity of Canadians
Absolutely.
and how people have found new homes.
You know, it's amazing. You know, the whole, you know, the human spirit and the sense of resilience, the triumph of the human spirit comes through over and over again. Not only with Canadians that are rushing to help, but also those refugees who have no fault of their own are now faced with rebuilding their lives in this country and wanting to contribute and become active citizens and Canadian citizens, and to do us all proud in this country.
We need lots of you guys, Chris. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful, beautiful stuff. Okay, folks, next week, surprise, worked on a couple of stories. Haven't got people committed yet, but they may commit me first. Thank you. We'll have someone for you next week. Thanks for being with us tonight. Have a good evening. Bye.